Hi, everyone, and welcome to Florida Pulse. I'm Florida Today engagement editor John A. Torres, and I will be your host today. We have a great panel joining us to talk about expansion, tax breaks, warehouses, and all things Amazon. Our first guest is Arlene Martinez. She's the Deputy Executive Director and Communications Director of Good Jobs First. She joined the nonprofit watchdog organization with experience watchdogging local government as part of the Ventura County STARS investigations team in California, and before that with the Morning Call in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the LA Times, Hispanic Link News Service in Washington, D.C. Arlene, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Don. Thanks for having me.
And up next, we have the guy with the coolest name that I've heard for a journalist in a long time, Mike Diamond. He sounds like he should be in Guys and Dolls or something. But Mike is a journalist at the Palm Beach Post. He has, covered their transportation and government. He previously worked for over 30 years for the Press of Atlantic City in New Jersey, where he covered the legislature. He's also served as editorial page editor and was part of the investigative unit. Mike, welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then rounding out the panel is our very own Dave Berman, a close friend of mine. He's our business editor here at Florida Today in Brevard County, where he's worked for 23 years. He previously was our county government and political reporter, as well as editor on the local news team. And before that, he worked at the Syracuse Post-Standard in upstate New York as a reporter and business editor in local news. Everybody, welcome to the panel. And we're going to be talking about Amazon, and which is where I get 90% of my Christmas gifts. I know that, but Amazon seems to be everywhere and growing. I'm going to start with Mike. Why is Amazon so focused on opening up so many warehouses in so many of our communities all throughout Florida and the nation as a whole?
Well, John, I think they need to be close to these communities to deliver their goods. And there are, there's the last mile facility and the general warehouse. The last mile facility is where the facilities get loaded onto and then get distributed to the to people who use Amazon products. And they're just expanding. They have hit a little bit of a bump in the road as the economy's tailed off, and some of their expansion plans, as others on this panel can talk about, have been curtailed. But it's just a matter of them getting these goods to people's homes, and they want to be as close to those residential areas as they can.
It's interesting. I was just in New York City, and there was a street corner where there was an Amazon truck parked, and they had workers there handing packages out to guys on light bicycles to go deliver them, just without a warehouse, just on a street corner. It was kind of interesting. Arlene, could you tell us first a little bit about what your organization does and what you have researched regarding Amazon and its subsidies, which is, maybe something that people don't know a lot about?
Yeah, thanks. And that's an important point that Mike made, that Amazon needs to be everywhere to get to its customers quickly. And that's one of the reasons why we don't think it should receive we don't think it should receive any public subsidies, actually, because of that needing to be near its customer base, which means it needs to be by highways, it needs to be by airports, it needs to be by major thoroughfares. We started looking at Amazon and its use of public subsidies about 6 years ago. We noticed that Amazon had moved to a subsidy strategy because the way that it came up really was by not paying sales taxes. At the time, communities weren't, the laws hadn't quite caught up to online shopping. So if you didn't have a physical presence in a state, you didn't have to pay sales taxes there. So Amazon grew its business quickly by locating in states that didn't have a sales tax. When states started cracking down on that, we noticed this push around 2012 to public subsidies, and they hired their first person that was really in charge of just working on extracting public money from communities. So we've been looking at that, and now the total has climbed to about over 4.8 billion. And that's just what we can find. Amazon has gotten increasingly secretive as these deals get more scrutiny and more criticism.
Was that number 4.8 billion with a B?
Yes, it was.
Wow.
But it's higher than that, but that's what we know.
Great, thank you. And for Dave, I know that you've been working on this project, Dave, with some other reporters. New York seems to be a state in which Amazon has received a lot of incentives lately. Can you provide a few examples of that, or an example of that, Dave?
Right. Well, in the Buffalo area in Niagara County, the company received $123 million of incentives to open a warehouse project there. And this was through the Niagara County Industrial Development Agency. And it was a little bit controversial because there were some people in the community that felt that the company would have opened there anyway without all these incentives. But the state government and this industrial development agency felt that the number of jobs that had been created by the company, which was more than 1,000 people, would justify these tax breaks and other incentives that the company did receive.
Interesting. And so the next question is for whoever wants to answer it, really. So I'm hearing that Amazon needs to expand in order to live up to its billing, right, as next day or same day service. So they need to be close to the customers. Yet some areas are providing incentives to them. Is that only for jobs for the area, or and what are some of the other pros and cons maybe associated with having Amazon in your county, in your town? Whoever wants to answer this, it's fine.
I could start with that. One thing that the company's providing for the area besides the jobs is the tax benefits from property taxes, which the company is paying. In a lot of these communities, they're developing on land that isn't developed, so they have a fairly small property tax value. And once the company builds a large warehouse, the property value increases dramatically, and thus the company is paying more property taxes, and also the sales tax benefits that through the sales of their goods, that also is helping the states and cities where the company is locating.
Yeah, to follow up on that, it's just an enormous amount of property tax increases that these towns get, and it's sometimes difficult for elected officials to maybe look the other way and really scrutinize this the way it should be, because so much more tax revenues coming in. For example, in Daytona, there was a property that had been classified as agricultural. It was generating $15,675 a year in property taxes. And when the Amazon facility got built, it was a last mile facility. It went up to 11.6 million. So from 16,000 to 11.6 million. So the tax bill would increase proportionally as well. In Deltona, before Amazon, we had a $4 million assessment jump up to 61.3 million. In Jupiter, 2.7 million to 134.3 million. So, it as I said, it has to be in the back of the mind of these elected officials whether to approve this project or not, and have that impact of the additional revenue in the back of their minds.
Interesting. Arlene, I would like to follow up with you. Do you think that the jobs that the company brings into an area justifies a tax break or a grant? I know that in one of the stories that we're doing, I think I had a like sneak peek, and somebody is quoted as saying we get 1,000 people a day entering Florida to live, and they need jobs. And so is this worth it, Arlene? Or
well, let me just talk on your last question briefly. So in Western New York, there's been about 4 subsidy deals. Just recently, the Investigative Post had a story about this last week in upstate New York. And what they found was that 2 of the 4 facilities gave Amazon 0 subsidies for 1,100 jobs. The other two for 1,100 jobs gave $130 million in subsidies. So you had two communities that had to give none of their communities money to Amazon because Amazon has to be in that part of the country because there's so many customers there. And then the other two counties that gave quite a bit of money, especially that Niagara deal that was just talked about. The issue there is that the property tax values that were referenced in a couple of these deals right now, that isn't money that will be going back to the community for decades because of the property tax breaks that Amazon gets when it comes in. So it comes in, it promises all this revenue, but because it's getting tax breaks in the Niagara County, 100% tax breaks, which means that residents will be paying their property taxes and so will other small businesses. Amazon won't be. And yet Amazon's bringing in potentially people to the community who need services. They need fire protection. Their children need to be educated in schools, the roads. Lots of trucks are going on these roads, and Amazon isn't contributing anything to any of those public services. So that's why it's a real problem when Amazon comes into a community with these big subsidy packages.
Interesting. And as people are taking notice of this, Dave, have you noticed anything about the warehouse openings? Are they scaling down a little bit? Is Amazon slowing down a little bit, or are they still going full force here?
Well, they are slowing down, and they have cut back on new openings of warehouses. I think they overbuilt. They were really ramping up really strongly during the height of the pandemic, and now they felt they're now overstaffed, and they posted big financial losses in their last 2 quarters. So the company has decided to either scale back on openings that they were planning on doing for warehouses or just drop projects entirely. For example, in Fort Myers area, they had plans for a major warehouse project, and they decided to just scrap that plan altogether. And then in Cocoa, which is on the east coast of Florida, they have completed a warehouse, but have not opened it. They were planning to open it at the beginning of this year, and now they're pushing that back to 2023. And I think a lot of the issue of opening warehouses is that they've decided they have to scale back on their payroll expenses because they just built up their warehouse system too quickly and now are losing money from their operations.
Interesting. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what happened at the Village of Gulf in Palm Beach County?
Sure. So that's an interesting situation. Kind of follow up on what Arlene was saying. You wonder whether these subsidies are necessary because they're coming anyway. And in Palm Beach County, no subsidies were given to Amazon. And I guess the closer they get into areas they really want to get into, they're not going to pursue subsidies. And at the Village of Gulf was an interesting situation because it's a tiny community, heavily residential, gated golf course communities, and Amazon wanted to build a last mile facility, and very close to residential areas. There was tremendous opposition. Eventually, Amazon put together a package. It's kind of a reverse subsidy where they were giving subsidies or incentives to the municipalities and the gated communities in the area. They were going to actually give these communities about $4 million worth of amenities. They were going to build a road, put up a traffic light. At the end of the day, the residents just didn't want it. They didn't want the increased traffic, the negative impacts from the cars and the trucks going back and forth. And, the Village of Gulf local governing body voted 6-1 against it, following a very contentious public hearing. At the end of the day, Amazon, with all their lobbying and trying to get the project through, got the support of 3 of the 4 communities all four were against it, but they convinced three of them to drop their opposition. One stayed with it. The commission just listened to the residents and voted against it and turned that project down. It's one of the few Amazon projects that really got a resounding defeat.
Well, and Arlene, I apologize. I moved on without allowing you to answer about the jobs question earlier. How many jobs are they creating with these warehouses, and is it worth it to these local areas, do you think?
Well, just an important point about what Mike was just talking about, in that a lot of times Amazon comes into an area and it's met with a lot of opposition. So in the New York example that we talked about, the Niagara one, a community next door, Grand Island, had fought successfully against putting this massive Amazon warehouse in there, because that community had a group of residents who were able to put that time, energy, and money into fighting this Amazon deal. So Amazon just went to Niagara, which is much poorer, with a community that doesn't have that same ability to mobilize in the way they did right next door. And Niagara kind of opened up their checkbook. So what you have in a lot of communities is where Amazon will take the least path of resistance sometimes. And sometimes we've found, and other stories have cited, where Amazon will go into communities where it's lower income and there's higher populations of Black and Latino residents, because they're met with less opposition. In terms of the jobs that Amazon creates, it always sounds like it'll be a great thing for a community, right? All these jobs. The problem is the way these deals are structured a lot of times. So Amazon a lot of times isn't required to pay a living wage. It isn't required to hire locally. It isn't required to even have full-time jobs. So what you have in a lot of warehouses are contract workers from temp agencies. A lot of part-time workers. Amazon relies heavily on temp agency and part-time workers. So all these great benefits you hear at Amazon touts about college tuition and all these leave days off, it isn't usually available to the majority of the workforce for Amazon. And stories by Bloomberg and others have found that Amazon will drive down wages for the entire sector in communities where it locates, because other businesses will drive down their wages because all they have to do is kind of meet where Amazon's at. So there's a lot of negative impact that happens to a community when Amazon comes in, not to mention that small businesses, which have really been the backbone of our country, don't benefit from those same subsidies that Amazon gets.
And
also, go ahead.
Relate to that, the small business angle that Arlene just mentioned. And one issue is that Amazon might put small businesses out of business because they're so cutthroat in their operations that they can undercut the prices on some of these smaller bricks and mortar stores. So they're in danger of closing down and then costing workers at these stores their jobs. So the net benefit of the jobs might not be as high as Amazon is saying it would be.
And is all of this just a response to our need for instant gratification, if you will, with our streaming services, online services? We order something, we want it on our doorstep within minutes. Is that what's happening here? I mean, why can't we wait a few days for Amazon to ship something to us?
Well, that is part of the issue. They're why they're opening seems like a warehouse in every community in the country, every county. They're trying to make next day deliveries, in some cases same day deliveries, and that's why they they might have 2 or 3 different warehouses in one county, and they're trying to hit every area so that they're the last mile warehouses, which are the ones that deliver within a day or less, are the ones that are popping up all around the country. So that is the instant gratification of the public. When they order something online, they want it now. And that's what Amazon is trying to accommodate through these warehouse facilities.
I got you. Arlene, can you Can you mention, like perhaps some of the more outrageous subsidies that Amazon has received over the years?
Sure. I mean, there's so many to choose from, to be honest. We have a database that tracks just Amazon subsidy deals. It's at goodjobsfirst.amazon tracker. But there's been, because Amazon locates near warehouses, I'm sorry, not warehouses, highways and freeways and airports and rail. We know that a lot of the subsidies aren't really justified. But for example, like a few of them, one last year in Monroe County, New York, another New York deal. That was approved for $134 million, and it had that local labor hiring agreement. So they said 80% of the jobs had to be hired locally. Well, later on, somehow, after it had kind of left public eyes, it went from 134 million to 150 million in an amendment that no one noticed until later. And then Amazon came back and said, you know what, we can't find that local labor. We're going to need to get out of that agreement. And the city officials let them out of that agreement. Another one that was bad is a $45 million Baltimore deal. It was right next to a shipping yard, right next to an airport, right next to rail and a port. So it was really one of those things where it's one of the most perfect locations, and it still got $45 million. And a small one, this kind of goes back to the small business angle I'm talking about. Amazon got $2 million for a fashion warehouse in Brooklyn. You might know that Amazon has like a fashion arm, and for a while it was trying to get into high fashion. So it got $2 million essentially to take pictures of its clothes for its website. And it was allowed to stay open during the pandemic because it was considered essential. And 2 million might not sound like a lot, but when we think about small businesses, what they could do with $50,000 or $100,000, you're talking about a lost opportunity to help your small businesses flourish. But there's just so many times that Amazon has gotten subsidy deals, and it shouldn't have gotten any.
Wow, a great point there. And I want to ask either Mike or Dave or both. Arlene just mentioned trouble finding workers. I know we've had a worker shortage here, at least in Brevard County, Central Florida, since COVID hit. What impact, if any, is that having on warehouse openings? Dave, you mentioned that the Amazon warehouse in Cocoa has kind of stalled. Is that the reason? Is it, because we don't have enough workers to fill their slots, or?
Well, I think the company has not really said why they're holding off on opening that facility, except to tell the city that they're not going to open till next year. But I think probably the worker shortage is playing a role in all this, as well as the companies wanting to kind of hold back on payroll costs to keep that in check for a little while till they regain profitability in that operation. But you're right, the number of workers is very small compared to the number of jobs out there, and the unemployment rate throughout Florida is historically low. It set records earlier this year, record lows. So I think that the worker shortage is playing a role in the difficulty in attracting people, as well as the issue of the workplace conditions. There's been some reports that it's really a difficult job as far as workplace injuries are high at Amazon facilities. So that's another thing that's preventing them from filling their workforce needs.
I do think it is a worker shortage issue, but it's also a shortage of a good jobs issue, right? So if Amazon wanted to pay more wages to attract the kind of workforce that it wants, that would stay, they could do so. But one of the problems with Amazon is these overnight shifts make childcare impossible. You don't have a 24-hour childcare facility that I've ever heard of. So you can't get people to fill these jobs because Amazon isn't willing to provide the kind of pay that these jobs deserve and the type of conditions that allow for people with children or other, for example, accessibility issues is difficult. So Amazon could be filling these jobs if it wanted to pay the wages that the workers deserve.
Arlene, just to follow up real quickly, Mike, just hang on one second, Mike. So I've seen some companies offer on-site childcare and things like that. Does Amazon offer that, or?
I'm not aware of Amazon offering that in any facility. I am aware of Amazon offering bonuses to people to leave the company if they've been there too long. Because one thing that Jeff Bezos believes is when you get in a job for too long, you become stagnant, and he doesn't want a stagnant workforce. And so he offers people who have been there a while money to leave.
Interesting. Wow. And I'm sorry, Mikey. You were going to talk about job shortage, worker shortage.
Well, actually, I have an interesting little sidelight to get into, which is in
Yeah.
our piece, and that's what happened in Cocoa Beach, I believe it was, that they decided to delay the opening, but it was substantially complete on December 26th, and the tax assessor there very shrewdly took advantage of the Florida state law, which says that on January 1st of last year, if you're substantially complete and you get a CO, you can go on to tax rolls. So she rushed in there and fully taxed that facility on January 1st. And Amazon has now done a tax appeal to challenge that. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Wow. How has inflation affected Amazon's growth, if at all? I mean, we're all paying more for everything. I'm sure Amazon's paying more for fuel and et cetera. Have you guys found anything like that, or?
So I think that's one of the reasons why in Palm Beach County they wanted to get into the Village of Gulf. Minutes away, miles away from all these gated communities that are getting all their developments. They saw a real bonanza there of, trips of just a few miles rather than 20 or 30 miles. And, obviously they push the envelope there. And, if they get too close to residential areas, that I think they learned a lesson there. They're going to maybe lose out. And they put a lot of money into plans and development plans and spent and wasted a lot of time in there. So it'll be interesting how that develops.
Great. Well, that's pretty much all the time we have. I want to thank our three guests, Mike Diamond, Dave Berman, and Arlene Martinez. A lot to think about here. Dave, real quickly, where can people find these stories that you guys are working on?
Well, they'll be on all the websites of Gannett newspapers throughout Florida, and they'll be in the printed newspapers as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Once again, I'm John Torres, engagement editor at Florida Today, and this has been Florida Pulse. Thank you for watching.